Although we Romans conquered Greece, she conquered us. She brought art to rustic Rome. That's a quote from Horace. Most historians would agree with Horace, who was a well-known Latin poet. With the destruction of the city of Corinth in 146 BC, Roman armies had proven that they were militarily superior to the Greeks. Nevertheless, when every statue and artifact in the conquered city was carried off to Rome to adorn public buildings and private homes, it proved how much the Romans admired Greek art. The combination of Greek culture and Roman life was a powerful one and still influences us today. The resulting culture is often called Greco-Roman because the Greek influence on later Roman works was so overpowering. The Greek statues of art brought back by the victorious Roman armies were used as models for Roman copies. Just as the Romans adopted the Greek gods and modified them to suit their purposes, they also borrowed the Greek style of sculpture and painting, simply adding Roman images and stories to the Greek models. Literature, or writing. The Romans were slow in developing a literature of their own. Roman writers turned to the Greeks for inspiration. If Homer had not already composed the Iliad and the Odyssey, it is doubtful that Virgil could have created the Aeneid. That Roman story picks up where Homer's Iliad ended. The idea of an epic poem as a national story, as a national history, began and continued in Rome. Most Roman writers were familiar with Greek models of poetry, history, and drama, and often used them in their own works. Plautus and Terence wrote comedies in verse, but these were really only copies of Greek plays. Other famous Roman authors of the Republican period include Catullus, Lucretius, Cicero, Sallust, and Caesar. Both Latin and Greek were the official literary languages. Greek scholarship was considered superior, and it was fashionable for wealthy Romans to hire Greek teachers for their children and to speak and write in Greek. During the Empire, large libraries were constructed in Rome, and a very respectable literature was produced by Roman writers. The most famous writer was Virgil, who produced the epic poem Aeneid, which told the story of the Trojan War after Homer's Iliad. Other writers include Horace, who composed poems using the Greek style called the Ode, Livy Tacitus, who wrote histories of Rome, and Juvenal, who criticized Roman society in his satires. Biography was the form of literature used by Suetonius, whose Lives of the Caesars tells us all about the early emperors, and Plutarch, who wrote Parallel Lives, which compares ancient Greeks with Romans. Ovid and Lucian are two other poets whose works we still read today. Meditations, a philosophical work written by Emperor Marcus Aurelius, is considered a fine example of Roman literature. Although the Romans imitated the Greeks in the field of literature, they produced many masterpieces of their own, which are still widely read. Medieval literature was greatly influenced by Latin literature, and for centuries, this was the literature studied in schools. Architecture. Doo-doo. In architecture, the Romans also borrowed from others. They first followed the Etruscans. Early temples were constructed of soft sandstone covered with stucco. These structures stood on a stone foundation with a porch in front of the building. The roof was constructed of wood and decorated with sculpture. Later, as the Romans became more familiar with Greek architecture, they imitated them. The Roman use of the column to surround temples and to adorn public buildings matched what the Greeks had long done. The Romans, however, were more practical in their use of Greek ingenuity. The Romans used their engineering skills to improve the arch, which they had borrowed from the Etruscans. By 150 BC, Roman engineers had perfected the use of the dome and invented a new building material, concrete. This long-lasting but lightweight, compared to stone, material enabled the Romans to build huge public works, buildings, stadiums, bridges, and aqueducts. During the Republican period, amphitheaters and basilicas, which are large public halls used for administration of justice, were some examples of architectural efforts. The immense Basilica Julia and Basilica Aemilia in the Forum Romanum were two of the buildings which were donated to the state by the Julius and Aemilius gens. Few changes occurred when the Republic gave way to the Empire. Buildings became larger and the statues more abundant, but the nature of Roman architecture remained the same. One exception, the Pantheon, a beautiful temple constructed in Rome, differed from typical Greek temples in a way that made it truly Roman. This temple was not rectangular, but round, and was topped by a huge dome. Although this temple is uniquely Roman, everywhere else Greek style was dominant. Ultimately, the Romans surpassed the Greeks in their magnificent system of roads, in their aqueducts, in the use of cement and bridges, in the perfection of their triumphal arches, and in the construction of their enormous public buildings. Boom! Art! We have little that remains of original Roman paintings except in the city of Pompeii. So swift was the destruction of the city by Mount Vesuvius, a volcano, and so perfect was the preservation of the town, that scholars have been able to study the architecture, sculpture, and paintings of that ancient city. According to the evidence in Pompeii, Romans enjoyed the use of frescoes, which is painting on wet plaster, and mosaic tiles to portray scenes of everyday life and nature throughout their homes. The fresco wall paintings were realistic, colorful, and used Greek designs for inspiration. The mosaic floor decorations started off as black and white designs, using Greek patterns for the borders. Waves, the Greek key, woven ropes. The mosaic floor decorations started off as black and white designs, using Greek patterns for the borders. Waves, the Greek key, and woven ropes. Gradually, small cubes of red brick, white limestone, and colored stones were added to decorate Roman mosaics, which moved from the floor to the walls. Eventually, during the late Empire, tapestries, carpets, screens, and curtains replaced the fresco paintings and the mosaics as the major decorations for Roman homes. Many Romans worried that this love of Greek things would weaken the Roman spirit. One of the most outspoken critics of Greek culture was Cato the Elder. Cato never changed in his opinion of Greek culture, but the Romans continued their love affair with all things Greek. Statues, paintings, and architecture. The Romans borrowed heavily from Greek culture in all these areas, but managed to create many works of their own as well. You're awesome.